Hello and welcome to our Women in Animation, the Need for Increased Representation panel today. I'm excited to be here. My name is Dr. Lisa Coleman and I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation at New York University. New York University is the largest private institution in the United States, and we have global campuses all over the world. And that is enough about me. Let me just start off, though, by saying I'm so excited to be here because I do work in the space of inclusion and innovation. This is particularly exciting for someone like me to think about representation and also, of course, the spaces in which we create animation and innovation. Let me thank the sponsors, DreamWorks Animation Studio, Marvel Animation, Mainframe Studios, Nickelodeon, Pixar, and Marvel. And also, I just want to give a big shout out to all of our alums out there who work across those platforms and studios. I always say this at NYU, when award season comes along, we win a lot of awards for our alums and our students and program out there. So congratulations to all of our NYU alums, of course, and students, former students who are doing great work out there with those organizations. And now I'd like to bring our panel on. So if our panelists can join us, that would be terrific. And I will have them introduce themselves. Let's see, Kelly. Hello, Kelly.
Hello, Dr. Coleman.
It's a pleasure, Kelly. So let's just hear your title and who you are.
Sure. So my name is Kelly Gardner, and I am the Vice President of Current Series at Nickelodeon Animation. And, you know, for my job, I oversee series such as SpongeBob SquarePants and the 2 spinoff series, Camp Coral and the Patrick Star Show. And also I oversee Star Trek Prodigy, the first animated series for Star Trek series for kids and families.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Kelly. It's a pleasure. Tanya?
Hello. I'm Tanya Green, and I am the head of preschool for Mainframe Studios in Vancouver, BC. And I oversee all of our preschool content. And we just dropped a show on Netflix called Team Zenko Go, is our most recent one. And yeah, so I work on content for all the littles.
Wonderful, Tanya. Thank you for being with us. Paige.
Hi. I'm Paige. I'm a production department manager at Pixar. My most recent film that I worked on was a Lightyear movie coming out in June.
Terrific. Pleasure, Paige. Let's see what I have left. Dana.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Coleman. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Vasquez-Eberhardt. I'm over here at Marvel Studios working in animation. I'm the lead executive across all of our animation projects, most recently with What If, and we've had a few more that have been announced. I am Groot, Spider-Man Freshman Year, X-Men 97, and Marvel Zombies. It's a pleasure to be here.
Terrific. Thank you, Dana. Jinko.
Hello, Dr. Coleman. Thank you for having me, and thank you, AfroAnimation Virtual Summit for inviting me. My name is Jinko Goto, and I serve as Vice President for Women in Animation. We are an advocacy group advocating for gender justice. 50-50 by 2025 is our campaign. And my day job is I produce animated features, currently working on an animated feature at Netflix with Mark Osborne directing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinko. And certainly, last but not least, Maureen
K. I got you. No worries.
I just had to look down.
Yes. Hi. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Maureen K. Dosu, and I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, business partner at DreamWorks Animation. So in this role, you know, but you asked what we do and part of our identity. So this is one part of my identity where I work with the studio and identify our long-term DEI framework focused on measurable and scalable strategies.
And you're a second-year alum with AfroAnimation.
I am. I'm so happy to be back. Yes, yes. So happy to be back. This is such a great forum.
Well, welcome everyone, and we're just going to jump right into the questions. And I'm actually going to start where talking a little bit about where you see this question about where you see this industry going. So, as women in animation, right, and from your sort of positionality, where do you want to see? Not just where do you see it going, but where would you like to see the industry go as it relates to representation on screen? So let me start with you, Paige. It's arbitrary. Everybody's going to get a chance to start, so so I'm just going to jump right in.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think I have thought about that a lot, and I think the answer is always just that we just continually have work to do to make sure we're seeing ourselves on screen, the people around us, making sure like we're creating a diverse framework from the beginning of the story, and not just like once we've already built the characters. You want to like start from the beginning. I think we talk a lot about that, like in story meetings as we're starting new projects, about like, okay, who are these characters? Who are they surrounded by? What is the world they live in? And how does that reflect the world outside of here? So I feel like at Pixar, we're really doing a lot of work to make sure that that is happening in our future films and projects and stuff. And I think it's important that it happens like behind the camera as well, because I think there is this really big push to get that representation on screen, and it really matters a lot. And it matters just as much to have that representation behind the camera, right? Or the digital camera for animation. So I just want to continue to see that diversity across the board, and not only in, key positions or stuff like that. I want to see it like at the highest possible levels, and for people to continue in that direction.
Great points about where you begin and the integration throughout the process, etc. And since we're talking about diversity, let's go to you, Marinike. I want to hear a little bit about, since that's in your title, you talked a little bit about one part of your portfolio.
Yes, absolutely. And at DreamWorks Animation, we believe that that the stories we tell, we should be as inclusive and diverse as the audience they're meant for. And that means, creating an equally inclusive and diverse workforce. And that's where I kind of lean in and really find my spark and my passion. We're constantly working to increase and maintain diversity in our employee population, and like Paige mentioned, that's both above and below those positions and those lines in both our film and our TV productions. We at DreamWorks, we're really lucky that the executive level is more than 50% senior leadership is female. But we want to continue to make sure we have that representation throughout all the levels. And so I think that, focusing not only on bringing that representation on screen, because it is important. I have 2 young kids, and part of my pivot back to animation was because I saw how they were engaging with the content that they were consuming. And it reminded me of how I engaged with the content that I consumed as a young child, and being able to see, the multifaceted and multidimensional representation of what it means to be a Black girl, was so important. It's not just one monolithic representation of who we are, but, having those different characters that, to Paige's point, are well-rounded and well-formed and complex and nuanced. That's what we want to see on screen. And so we had, like, for instance, even our show Kipo, there's Wolf and Kipo, and they're both Black girls, but they're so different and they're so amazing in their own rights, right? And that's what I feel like when I look at my two children. They're both Black girls. They both have me as a parent, but they're so unique, and I want to be able to see that uniqueness. And I think part of being able to form those characters and form that representation is having that representation behind screen as well. And so, that's where I want to see the industry and really continue to see that path grow. It's empowering those voices and bringing those different stories to light, both in front of the camera, but also in terms of the workforce that helped created that.
Thank you and also for both behind, as you mentioned, you and Paige, both in front and behind, but also thanks for reminding us about those future generations, because we know, right, in terms of this imprint matters of what gets consumed, etc. So Dana, how about I go to you next?
I mean, I think it's going to sound like a beautiful record on repeat, but it's absolutely true. It's where I get excited and where Marvel Studios gets excited, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say where I think where all of us are probably coming from is to see more of us, see 365-degree characters, or 360 characters, well-rounded. Telling specific stories doesn't mean that it's just one type. Oh, it's the girl in the group. Oh, it's the Black woman in the group. Oh, it's the Asian woman in the group. And then we automatically go to these, these caricatures, because that's where it starts, and it feels like if we're not past, we're getting past that mark where characters that we see on screen can and should represent all different kinds of characters, villains, heroes. Villains aren't, black and white. Why are they villainous? There's storytelling with depth and with specificity. And I absolutely agree. It comes from behind the screen. It's what's shown on the screen. It's at every level. It's from, our coordinators that start their journey on a production, all the way up to the showrunners who lead it, who are writing the stories, who are directing the stories, who are thinking outside the box, bringing their own experiences as young women, being fans of storytelling and animation, bringing their influences to the stories that they wish to tell. That's what's exciting. And I think that's what's going to continue to fuel the engagement of not only audiences of all stripes, but women storytellers, women executives, women who are in places of production, at every level. That's just what's very exciting for Marvel, for the studios. You see it in live action, and we're just starting in animation, but it's certainly a mantra we're very with great intent carrying through to animation as well.
Thank you so much, Dana. Now for Jinko, Kelly, and Tanya, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. And of course, you can answer part of that question, but could you start to pivot and tell us a little bit about your journeys? Tell us a little bit about your journey in relation to your male peers. So as you think about representation and what you want to see, also tell us a little bit about that journey that thus far in terms of how you've seen, if there have been differentials in terms of that journey. So why don't I start with you, Jinko?
Thank you. So that's a really interesting question, because I think, when I joined Women in Animation back in 2013, I realized that I've been in a very privileged position. The fact that I'm an immigrant, the fact that I'm a woman of color, is that I've had a very privileged life where I got into positions and got to a point in my career where I wanted to give back. And when I look back about giving back, you saw how few women were in these positions, and how few women were actually in mid-level positions to get to senior level positions. But when you looked at the schools, women were bulk of the people studying animation. So there's that big gap. So we started focusing on how do we feed that pipeline to bring more representation. But now what's more important is not just feeding the pipeline, but how do we get retention? How do we elevate them? How do we close that gap between the entry level and the senior level? So those are all very important things, work that we do as part of Women in Animation. And also, we need to look beyond just women. We need to look at the non-binary. We need to look at the trans. We need to look at all of the underrepresented genders here, because without that, we're not going to be able to change the stories that we tell. We want to tell these to be authentic stories. And I think everyone touched this with your previous question, is that authentic storytelling requires both in front of the camera and behind the camera. And we need this group representing through the entire pipeline from entry level to senior level.
Thank you for bringing up those important issues around retention and promotion, which is just as important as hiring, because sometimes we focus on the front end and not on the development end. And also, thank you for the expansion and thinking about, and as we think about emerging generations, which is where I work, actually, I was just on a phone call about pronouns. And so really thinking about that work and the expansion of communities, particularly our trans communities, our non-binary communities. And we know that's a growing population, not just here in the United States, but I'm not even in the United States, but at any rate, globally as well. Kelly, why don't you pick up and tell us also, integrate that component about your journey, if you would.
Sure. So I've worked in animation since 2005, and certainly way back then, just there weren't a lot of people who looked like me, in the room in animation. And it took a long time for me to feel like animation was the industry for me, or that I felt like I belonged, because just, usually it was me in a room full of, I'll be candid, older white men. So it was hard to kind of find my voice in those rooms and to just really feel like I belonged and find my place. I will say that today, it feels a lot better, especially on the executive level. The teams that I work with are certainly, the executives are actually predominantly women. We still need to work on, people of color, and especially Black people in this industry. We still have a long way to go there. But yeah, I do feel, like in certain instances, like male counterparts maybe just had like a little bit of a leg up on me. Maybe there were more things. I think, this is a very social industry too. So there are things that, people kind of, biases about, like certain, hobbies that you may have, or just knowing people from certain clubs or groups that maybe I was not a part of or belonged to. So I did not have that insider information, or just that, friendship to like bring me into different spaces. So I think, like what, working on today, it is, increasing representation for me, especially behind the scenes, because I think that is where you start to see it in front of. You don't even realize that you're missing it unless you have executives that look like me, or, look like Dana. And you start to think like, hey, I want to see characters that look like me in front of the screen, as main characters on shows, and telling, different types of stories. As a kid, there were very few, Black girl animated characters for me to identify with. So it is, on my agenda to make sure that, young girls of color today, have those characters to identify with, and also realize, that like we're not, a monolith. I remember for a long time, even in my department, where it's like, oh, Kelly, take a look at this and let me know what you think of this Black character. And it's like, well, this is my personal opinion. I don't speak for all Black people. So, even
really, Kelly, you don't know all of them.
I know, it's crazy, right? So even on that level, where now, I see behind the scenes that the departments that I work with are much more diverse, and it feels like a better environment, and one in which, you feel a sense of belonging. So over, the course of, I think, what is that, 17 years that it's taken to get here. We're not there yet, but it is better. And it does feel, like an industry where different types of people can find their space and, feel like they belong, and that we, have a voice and can make the types of shows and hires that we feel, are important, and, reflect our audience. I think that's the biggest thing, is that too, the audience has changed over the past 17 years. And so we want, the shows and the movies that we're making to reflect our audience first and foremost.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Thank you also for this last point in particular about the shifts in audiences, right? And in that thinking about those models. And also thank you for being very specific about the other growth areas, right? The areas where there has been growth, and then some of the other areas in terms of challenges, thinking about representation along race, right? Other kinds of sort of identity factors. Tanya, so tell us a little bit about your journey as well.
Yeah, so like Kelly, I've been in the industry in animation since about 2004 or 5, feels like forever. And it has definitely changed so much since I started it, because it was, all of my bosses were older white men, and I was always the young girl in the group where it was, use your voice, sparingly if you needed, kind of thing. And having to learn and find mentors was a bit more of a challenge, and having people to look up to and figure out who I wanted to be and how I wanted to get there. And I was fortunate to be able to find a couple of mentors to help, guide me. And I've been using that as my giving back kind of moment, in that I'm a mentor for women in film and television for Toronto. And I go for coffee with up and coming artists, because everyone needs a chance to have someone support them and get them to the next level. And at Mainframe, we're really focused on making sure that we nurture people's careers and help them grow, because behind the camera is so important, especially getting into those higher director, art director, production designer roles, that I find that it's definitely, let's get more voices, female voices of color, all gender voices in there, because it feels like we're just, the underrepresented genders are not, their voices aren't there in those levels to make those big changes. And so part of my goal is, in preschool especially, is to put that out there, to have on screen and behind screen be as diverse as possible, to tell those stories with kids who are really, our audience is now savvy. Our audience is different. Our audience wants to see themselves, and they should see themselves. And we want to inspire the next generation. We want them to be better than us, and we have to learn how to help them grow. And I want to do more learning, and I want, my young son to, be a better person than me. So how do we put out content that's really going to help them? And I feel like being able to have the time to help give advice, make connections for up and coming artists and executives and creatives, so that they have a voice at the table, and really kind of, share their insights. As I learn so much every day from my team, and Mainframe is very focused on making sure our teams are diverse, and that we crew up the way it needs for the right team for the show, the right representation, making sure that everyone has a voice at the table and that every voice matters. And I only get better, and our shows only get better by the amount of great insights from people and different perspectives that wasn't there when I started as a young exec a long time ago. There was just very, very narrow, not narrow, but I feel like storytelling was very different 10, 15 years ago. And I feel like we are now evolving to make sure that storytelling is more complex, more diverse, more nuanced. And we're not talking down to kids. We're actually involving kids and empowering kids in the storytelling process. And they know more than we think they do. And like giving them characters that they can relate to, that they can understand, that they can see themselves in, that they can tell those stories, that their stories are being told. I think it just allows for our audience and us as executives to just put better stuff out there for our next generation.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
And thank you for bringing up mentorship, particularly thinking about mentorship, and also, of course, this idea of what I call co-creation, right? Thinking with students, but in this case, with kids, right? And really thinking about that process, because I think far too often we forget how useful it can be to involve, right, youngsters in terms of our production. And then lastly, of course, we're talking about opening pathways. My next series of questions I'm going to direct to each one of you individually. And I'm going to actually start with you, Tanya, which because you just brought up a little bit about your work in Canada, right? And so as the head of a preschool for Mainframe, talk to us a little bit about the Canadian industry. Has it been easier? Do you know, in terms of contrast? And tell us a little bit about what that path has looked like in terms of this work in Canada.
It's interesting. Canadians tend to be a lot more, I guess, reserved. I mean, polite maybe. We kind of we dance around it sometimes to be nice, right? So I think that it's. In preschool specifically, I found that there's more women in general in preschool, and that there was more female voices and perspectives in that. But in Canada, I feel like we've definitely evolved from, I started off in, 6 to 11, and there was a lot more male voices in that area. And preschool is a lot more female, but I feel like Canadian industry has evolved to include more, that being more inclusive and be more open to new ideas. But I do think at the beginning it was a lot more of dancing around it and not being as direct as we need to be. And we are improving dramatically from that. But I do feel at the beginning of my career, it was a lot of, well, we just will pretend it's not happening over here kind of thing, or we're going to be nice, or we're going to we include you, but we include you in a way that is nice instead of being kind. And I think that that is definitely evolving as the Canadian industry evolves, especially in the kids space, that we're very conscious about making sure that everyone's included and there's a voice. I feel like the Canadian broadcasters and all of the Canadian studios are really putting an effort into making sure that inclusivity and diversity and equity is a really big focus for all of them. And I feel like, 15 years ago when I started, it wasn't something that was a huge focus. And I do feel that, especially in the last 5 years, I think it's definitely changed dramatically. And we're having those conversations. We're having hard conversations. We're putting training in place, especially at Mainframe. We're doing a lot of training for our staff. And I know at other studios, it's really focused on inclusivity and diversity. And we're all really focused as a whole industry together of how to support each other and how to bring everyone up that needs to have the support to go there. So I do feel like that it has made a huge shift from being nice to being kind and being supportive and actually helping us become better at the industry in general. And I think that every creator and production company in the industry, in the kids space specifically, have really made a huge leaps and bounds in that area. We have a long way to go, but I feel like we're really focused on doing the work.
Thanks so much, Tanya. We are going to get to some of your questions. Don't you worry in the audience. I'm just going to ask another just a little round robin here. So Kelly, you've worked on some phenomenal evergreen projects like SpongeBob, etc. So tell us a little bit about, as you think about the evolution in this industry, particularly with women, and the production of things like SpongeBob, do you think this increased representation has enhanced things like the production of new and evergreen projects?
For sure. And I know just because there's so much animation production going on now that I think we've had to move beyond what I feel like executive producers or hiring managers have used in the past, which is kind of an expediency bias where you go with the people that you know. And so now we are expanding our networks and relying on really wonderful programs that our recruiting team and HR professionals have instituted, where we're able to expand our reach to people outside of those small communities and bring in really wonderful artists. And I think especially during the pandemic, when people were working from home, we were actually able to bring in even more kind of diverse artists to work on projects that we maybe would not have worked with before, because we just were not used to kind of doing that remote work and working with people from other countries. So I think all of that has helped to increase just kind of the different types of voices and points of views that we see on shows. And I see it in the storyboard pitches that I attend, and the type of energy that is coming to a show like SpongeBob, which has been on air since 1999. That's over 20 years. And especially in the spinoff series, like the Patrick Star Show and Camp Coral, where, we are telling different types of stories and putting different characters at the forefront. And also, in our casting decisions, which is, a way that you can open it up for, these kind of evergreen shows is, as we're creating, guest characters and, new characters, it's kind of like, well, let's look at that with an eye towards, what are kids into today, and like making sure that that's represented in those characters. And just hearing, what the new directors and storyboard artists, find funny and their points of view, I think have really made an influence on, shows like SpongeBob. And like I said, you can see it definitely more in the spinoff series of the Patrick Star Show and Camp Coral, those newer influences. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted.
I'm trying to mute to keep my sound off in the background, so sorry about that. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for noticing that I was on mute, the phrase of 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Paige, I'm going to turn to you now and talk to us a little bit about diversity in storytelling. right? You have been part of Bow, you've been part of Soul, and the most recent Turning Red. So what other stories do you see emerging, and why these types of stories? You've referenced this a little bit earlier, are important, but then of course, moving forward, what other kind of stories we'd like to see?
Yeah, I think we should just keep expanding on, the world around us. I feel like, um, not that there's like a checklist or anything. Like, I feel like we just have to keep being open and seeing like what kind of stories we can tell. And I think that does start from the people telling them, because you're like a lot of everyone has said in this panel, you're invested in the stories that you where you can see yourself. So it does kind of start from like, okay, well, who's the director on that? Who's the main character? In animation, and like at Pixar, for example, we have like stories about cars. So it's also like, who is being cast as a car? Like, who are those? Who are the people that are like filling those voices? Who are the people telling the story? So I think it's like there's so many stories out in the world, and I think it's just about like making sure you're not limiting yourself, and like pulling from different resources, pulling from different voices, because when you have the same type of people telling the story, and from what I've seen, it's like predominantly white men, you'll start getting the same stories. You'll start, getting the same casting. You're not thinking beyond like what could be told and what could be out there in the world. So I think we're making progress, but there's still so much to tell. And like, I'd love to see a story about a trans person on screen. I'd love to see like in animation, because it's like stuff we don't see. I think Soul was like one of the first movies where we had like a Black person on screen, which like in animation, which is crazy to think about, that it takes so long for these things to happen, but animation also takes a long time to make. So yeah, I think it's just continuing to push boundaries and get different voices in the room.
Thank you so much, Paige. And thank you for talking about getting those new voices in the room, and for particularly talking about the emergence of these new stories. Jinko, I'm going to turn to you. So you were quite literally part of the mission to increase representation for women in animation with your role at Women in Animation, and I'm going to pick up on this in a second. And so tell us a little bit about that role and the importance of organizing. And we actually have a question from Cameron Dillon, who asks, and by the way, we're getting a lot of shout outs to this amazing panel. Awesome, great, all those kinds of things. So just so you're aware, in case you're not reading, but hello to the amazing panel. How do you create a local Women in Animation chapter? All right, so tell us a little bit about Women in Animation, your journey there, and then of course, specifically to this question. Thank you.
Great. So as an advocacy group, where we started was really about educating people in the industry. And so when we started back in 2013, we said, okay, look at the landscape where there are a lot of women studying animation, but they're not in the workforce. So our first World Summit that happened at Annecy in I believe that was 2014, was talking about unconscious bias. So we started there, and to get everyone to recognize, and it's really about educating and getting that information out there. So as part of Women in Animation, our job is to say what's going on in the industry, how do we get that information out, how do we get everyone to connect, and talk about these issues so that we can make change within the whole industry. So that's where the journey began. And then we said, okay, we're seeing that women need mentors. What are the things that are external forces? What are the internal issues that's stopping from women being in the business and moving up in business? So we started a mentoring program that became something that became a way for women to create communities outside the workplace. So we have mentored almost close to 2,000 women over the last several years. And thank you to COVID, it's allowed us to create a virtual community for these women. So it's great to see that women are connecting all around the globe, where communities are being built. We felt that one-to-one mentorship was important, but what was mostly important for especially women starting the business was to create a circle. So we came up with a mentoring circle where women connect and they become, they create a community with other mentees so that they can have a connection outside of the workplace, so a safe space, a space that they can go to and ask questions about, how do I do this? Or, how do I deal with these challenges, and or how to get opportunities. So these circles have become something very important. The other aspect that's really important for us is also making sure that we have allies. This work cannot be done just by women alone. It takes all of us to do this work. So allyship is something very important that we focus on as well, and making sure that we have allies. And now we're also focusing on sponsoring. How do we get women to elevate to a higher position? Sponsoring is something that's very important. Getting our allies to become sponsors so that it's not women raising their hands saying, I want to become a director. It's really studio executives and other directors sponsoring women to say, I am going to sponsor you so that you can be the next director or the next production designer. So these are the different types of things that we do as an organization to really try to promote the underrepresented genders into the workforce and to really help them to sustain and grow within their career. To answer to how do you create a women in animation chapter, visit us at www.womeninanimation.org. We have Gail Curry, who was an executive at ILM at DreamWorks Animation, who's spearheading chapters for us. We are an organization where all the board members are all volunteers. And until literally about 18 months ago, we had basically 0.5% of staff. Today, we have gone to a place where we have a director of operation, Jen Olson, and we have a small staff. So this work cannot be done without everybody, including everyone sitting in this room today, because it really does take an entire village to make this change.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive answer, for both telling us a little bit about the history and then, of course, the important aspects. And thank you for for going back to this notion of mentoring and the importance of mentoring. We know that mentoring, we know this, I'm a researcher, I'm one of those geeky academics. We know that mentoring is really crucial, mentoring and sponsorship. And as you also mentioned, allyship, and particularly those circles that you talked about, because we know peer-to-peer engagement is also crucial if we're trying to change, right, and transform industries. And so now I'm going to actually, again, integrate one of our questions from the audience as well. And I'm going to turn to you, Marinike. I want to talk to you a little bit about this idea of equity. So the question here it's from, and Alice, I don't know if your last name is Jiang. If I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize, but I think this is from Alice Jiang, and she asks, in DEI initiatives, I find myself wondering how the equity aspect is being addressed in regards to intersectionality and socioeconomic background. So, and I'm just going to add to that question a little bit here and tell us a little bit about your role, right, to address, right, this kind of question, and of course, for overall increased representation.
I have to pause for a second and just thank Alice for that question, because it's such an important question. And calling back a little bit on what Jinko said about women in animation and how for so long that was comprised of volunteers. And in my role now, I could take that passion and that space that I occupied initially as one of our co-leads for our employee resource groups, which is our ERG, which, I mean, you said the audience is geeking out over this panel. I'm geeking out over this panel. I would show you my notes and all the accolades I'm writing down. But part of that, you mentioned about peer mentorship and creating that group and that network. And that's what we've invested in with our ERGs at our studio. And we have a number of ERGs, and they celebrate not only your lived experience and your identity, but also that allyship component of bringing people together. And we have ERGs that represent, the Black employee network, but also the women network and the young professional networks. So thinking about, you know, all of those dimensions of identities that we can bring to our roles, and having that component of having that intersectionality when those ERGs get together as opportunities to create that network and that peer group, so that you're not the singular. Because I'll be honest with you, I felt like that, calling back to what Kelly said, I felt like the singular in so much of my journey, right? That unicorn in the room, and I use unicorn because I'm a mystical creature, but you know, being the only is exhausting sometimes. So with those employee resource groups, we're able to pull that only that's on this production and the only that's on that production. And you got to bear in mind, we're a studio too. So it's also about bringing those voices that might not be in the actual story room or writer's room, but that love animation and are part of the, you know, the accounting team, or part of the legal team, or part of the music teams, right? So there's a mass community of individuals that we can bring together through our ERGs. And then through that, we also empower our ERGs to help us identify those organizations and partner organizations that really think about that equity component. So for instance, we have been very intentional about our diversity outreach and pipelining opportunities into the studio. We've also been intentional about going out with representation. So much of increasing, I think, our workforce is also letting people know from those different, you know, socioeconomic backgrounds or that intersectional lens, that there actually are roles that create careers within animation. Like that's a little bit of a strange thing. I'm my name is Marini Kay. I'm first generation. My father was Nigerian. You know, STEMs. I could be a doctor or a lawyer, but when I say no, I want to be in animation, and I've been saying this since I was 17. It's a little bit of a foreign concept. So through our ERGs and through that space, we are able to go out into those communities and say, actually, no, there is a thriving network and opportunity for growth and career and financial stability through your passion of animation, and reach back into the communities. We also are then able to have partnerships with, for instance, like our HBCU 20 by 20, which is an organization that then we partner with to host fellows. And we have a fellowship that's opened up to HBCU 20 by 20 participants. We also have opportunities to look at, for instance, partnering with Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which directly looks at recidivism and the impact that has on our communities. And we're bringing in interns from that organization to help, you know, enter them back into that workforce and back into supporting and getting out of that recidivism cycle. So I appreciate the question, because so much of when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now through my role and that head count, and that's an investment, you know, that's our studio is saying, look, it ain't just about volunteers. We know that this is something that's business critical and important. So we have teams that are dedicated to looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm lucky that I get to be one of those members. So when we look at diversity, we can look at, you know, again, that outreach and actually bringing different lived experiences and voices into our workforce. When we look at equity, we can also talk about, you know, reaching those different socioeconomic or intersectional lenses. And we can also think about, okay, once folks are here, how are we, you know, providing opportunities such as mentorship programs, such as sponsorship programs, such as peer, you know, programs. Our ERGs are actually, they have budgets. I'm going to pause there, just in case any other studio wants to do it. Let's give our ERGs budgets. All right. So, you know, things like that. And then we also have the inclusion part, which is that community that we really build when we're bringing those voices, and we're able to leverage those voices and ask them about the content, ask them to weigh in. Even though I'm not necessarily on that show, I have lived experiences and I have reactions, and I'm more than happy to share those with the content makers. And through, you know, my role, I'm able to bring those opportunities and foster that connection so that our communities of marginalized or people with marginalized, historically marginalized backgrounds have that empowered voice to impact this industry that we love. And so again, I so appreciate that question, thinking about not just the diversity and the inclusion, but also that equity piece. So thank you so much for asking it.
Thank you so much for your answer, and thank you for the important points that you brought up about intersectionality and so much more, the ERGs, et cetera. And thanks for the plug for the budgets, I'm sure.
Right.
All right, okay. And for the investment piece. Dana, I'm gonna turn to you now. And Dana, it seems like Marvel is all in. They're all in. They're all diversity all the time, all in everywhere. I don't know, there's that joke out there, which Marvel character will you be? We're gonna ask you that question, certainly. Where what do you see? Where do you see yourself in the Marvel universe or in the metaverse or however you want to answer that? But I have you can answer that question. But I have another question out here, which is really when we go back to this idea of mentorship, and we have a lot of people out here in the audience who actually they want to be you all, right? They want to be you, Dana. They want to be you, Paige, et cetera. And so the question that we have from Jade Dotson is as a student in college, how do I maintain professional mentor relationships with people like you? I know people in the industry, but I don't want to come off too strong. I don't want to be too pushy, but I also don't want to lose connections. So can you help me with that?
I saw that question pop up. I'm like, yes, let's talk about that. And the first thing I'll say is be bold in the advocacy for yourself. Take those opportunities to quote unquote cold call, or as like Keith was saying, like literally cold call, reach out. There are a vast amount of at our fingertips opportunities to connect with the people you admire. LinkedIn, even on your favorite like art platform. If you're an aspiring artist and someday you want to direct, to character design, to just know how to get your foot in the door, you have an affinity for someone's art, they've worked in it, send them, conduct yourself, of course, in the professional way, trust yourself to be that professional, reach out, introduce yourself, and say simply that, I have a question. How do I get into this industry? I've been an admirer of your work. How have you gotten so good? How have you gotten where you are? Do that. One of the things that constantly have me pinching myself about working in this business is not only that, a good portion of our time, let's put it out there, we get to watch cartoons. So like, that's kind of amazing, just like bar none, but also just the community of support, even for as worldwide as it is, and it is worldwide, the animation industry is a very small, very intimate, and very supportive community. It is, I actually can't really think of an instance. It's easy to avoid the people who are jerks, just avoid the jerks. Those are the few bad apples. They honestly are. Take a chance, reach out, trust yourself to be a professional, and ask the question. Like Tanya, I do my best to, if I can't hit somebody back when they, reach out and ask me a question on LinkedIn at some point, I will try and point them in a direction to like, oh, want to connect you with recruiting to talk. I talk to colleagues in the industry. Kelly and I, yay, Kelly, I've worked together for years and years. It's sort of like, think of animation as like being on a big college campus. There are different buildings, there are different subjects that people are studying, there are different, specialties, but we're really all united in not only support to make the best possible shows, but also in support of each other. It's a very welcoming community. This question, I'm sure that we've all come across quite a bit, and it comes most often from women, is I want to ask, but I don't want to be pushy. I want to ask, but I don't want to turn people off. I want to ask, but. It is a pitfall, I think, that women tend to put ourselves in. And it's because of those stigmas. It's because of those societal, stigmas that we've been living with, which is if you are to be bold in asking a question, you might come off as pushy. to express yourself in a meeting and might be taken as shrill. Put all that aside. Just put it aside. Don't worry about it. That is the past. Go for what you want. Trust yourself to be your professional self and make those connections. You have, like, it starts quite often in school. It certainly starts with your first job. That's where you start making connections. Talk to people, go out for lunches, have coffees, do that in a way that is authentic to yourself. Some people, like me, aren't naturally social butterflies. I tend to keep a small group of people. That is fine. You can still make many great inroads. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room to get noticed, but what you have to do is be consistent and carve out the time for yourself. Treat it with the importance that you treat going to your job, that you treat taking care of your family. It's the same sort of thing. It is a commitment you make to yourself to move yourself forward in the industry. No one will take it as shrill. No one will take it as bossy or being pushy. What they might do is, you may not get someone who responds to your question. That's fine. Just keep on asking. They could be too busy. They could be traveling. There could be a million things going on. Don't let that deter you. Don't assign a narrative that puts yourself in a box. Just honestly, it sounds almost too simple, and in a way it really is. Don't hold yourself back. It's very welcoming here, and we would love to have you. Just keep on asking.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much. Be bold, do it, break out of the box, break out of the stereotype, reach out. There's a supportive community out there for you. Thank you so much, Dana. We are actually running out of time. I can't believe this amazing panel that we have run out of time so quickly. But what I'd like to do is a quick round robin, 15 seconds each, if you could keep it to that, because we do have one final question, which is about skill transfer. And it's really about, I have some experience. I want to break into animation. How do I do that? So my last question is 15 seconds of advice for people who want to break into animation. All right, let me start with Kelly. 15 seconds.
Believe it or not, I was a political science major in college, so not animation at all, right? So it just basically starts with, internships, making those connections, people like in HR departments saw that I went to University of California, San Diego. They also went to that college. So that was a little bit of
internships, connections, reach out.
Use your college networks. And animation is a huge industry and has a lot of different departments. So you do not have to be an artist at all. There's an executive side, there's a casting side. So just, find what works, where your skill set matches.
Thank you, Kelly. Tanya, 15 seconds.
Find where your skill set matches or what you can flip it to match. So if you want to go into production and you're really good with spreadsheets, highlight that. Have coffees with people, reach out and talk to people, get information on what the industry, like the jobs that you have in a studio, and figure out what you think is really going to be something that you're interested in, and then start building your skill set towards that, taking like free workshops, online classes, and talking to your network and expanding who you know.
Build your learning, expand your network, do the coffees. Jinko.
Have grit.
Grit. All right, have grit. Dana.
I'm going to say it again. Be bold, just do it.
Be bold, just do it. Paige.
Look for the different avenues in. I started as a temp, for example, and worked my way into the industry that way.
We've got political scientists, temps. We've got people coming from everywhere. So you too can do it. And we're ending with you. Rinko, go right ahead.
All right, here we go. I think there's been more access that's been created. I think the pandemic has caused a lot of, pinch points, but it also provided access. Like, look, Dr. Coleman, I'll be honest, I saw you on YouTube. You've got a great playlist right now, right? I saw your interviews. So you can have access to research and find those ways to map your transferable skills. And then, like Tanya said, highlight them and leverage LinkedIn. I am a digital adapter / digital native. Y'all are digital natives. Y'all know how to hit me up on my LinkedIn and everything else that way. And know that we want your voice. We want you. You don't have to fit a mold. just lean into what you bring, that passion, be that magical unicorn that you are, and know that we're welcoming those personalities and that voice. And like Kelly said, last point, we're industry, so there's, just because you don't necessarily draw, I never drawed, that's the word. I never drew, but I did enjoy making those connections with folks. And through that, I've been in production and now the director of DEI. So lean into your passions, use the resources available through the internet if you got them. Use the be bold, have the grit, the growth mindset, and just do it.
Fantastic advice, everybody. Labrea Bazilla, I'm sorry I didn't say your name. I know that was your question, just to acknowledge you out there. This has been an amazing panel. I can't believe you outed me like that about my YouTube. But thank you so much for this amazing discussion and panel. We hope that you will take these incredible takeaways, and we look forward to increased representation of women in animation. Thank you again. And of course, thank you to the organizers and to the sponsors. I turn it back to fabulous Rio, I think, right now.
Okay, thank you. I have to say, I think this is my favorite panel of all time. Honestly, the feedback we're getting on YouTube, I've probably gotten 30 or 40 LinkedIn requests in the last hour alone because of you ladies. Honestly, I can't even tell you what it means to me, just as a woman in entertainment, but a woman who is sort of an ally and a bystander to animation. I don't draw, I never drawed either, or drew. But I worked at Fox and, in Disney, and, I was alongside Cars, and I was alongside The Simpsons and Family Guy, and worked with those amazing creators. So I think someone said there's other jobs if you don't draw. Thank you, Morinike. I was in marketing. And so, there's lots of ways in. So I thank you, ladies. We're going to go ahead and prep for the next amazing panel that actually is going to put the Afro in AfroAnimation. It's African animation. We have folks from South Africa, from Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome. We have folks from Ghana. We're going to talk about the storytelling in Africa and the collaborations that they're making. So thank you so much. We'll see you up in about 5 minutes for the next panel.